Origins of the Assyrian people and early settlements. The Assyrian people trace their origins back to one of the oldest civilizations of the ancient Near East. Emerging in the early Bronze Age, the Assyrians initially settled along the upper reaches of the Tigris River, in what is now northern Iraq. Their early presence centered around the ancient city of Ashur, from which their name is derived. This city, strategically located on a plateau near the Tigris, would later become a spiritual and political hub for the Assyrians. Archaeological findings suggest that Ashur was already a modest settlement by the 3rd millennium BCE, gradually evolving into a significant urban center. The geographic location of the Assyrians placed them at a cultural crossroads, exposed to various influences from the Sumerians to the south, the Hurrians to the north, and later, the Babylonians. The rise of the Assyrians was marked by their resilience and adaptability. Despite frequent invasions and natural challenges, they managed to develop a distinct identity rooted in their language, religious practices, and administrative organization. Their language, a branch of the Semitic family, shared ties with Akkadian but eventually evolved into a distinct dialect known as Assyrian Akkadian. This linguistic development mirrored their broader cultural growth, as they gradually separated themselves from their Akkadian predecessors. The Assyrians displayed a strong sense of continuity, drawing on the achievements of earlier Mesopotamian cultures, while also innovating in areas such as governance, military strategy, and architecture. The early Assyrian settlements were typically fortified towns, reflecting the volatile nature of the region during the formative periods of Mesopotamian history. These settlements were not just defensive structures, but also centers of trade, religion, and administration. The harsh terrain and unpredictable climate of northern Mesopotamia necessitated ingenuity in agriculture and infrastructure. The Assyrians responded with the development of sophisticated irrigation systems, enabling them to cultivate crops and sustain larger populations. Their early society was agrarian, yet it also showed signs of early urbanization, with structured governance and religious institutions playing a central role in daily life. Religion played a foundational role in shaping Assyrian society. The worship of the god Ashur, the city's namesake, became a central tenet of their belief system. Over time, Ashur came to symbolize not only a deity but also the divine authority of the Assyrian state. Temples and ziggurats dedicated to Ashur and other deities were prominent in early settlements, reflecting the deep interconnection between governance and spiritual life. Priests held significant influence and often acted as intermediaries between the ruling elite and the broader population. Religious festivals and rituals reinforced community bonds and legitimized the authority of rulers. Assyrian political organization began to take shape during the early 2nd millennium BCE. Kingship emerged as a hereditary institution, and rulers began to assert their authority over surrounding territories. Early kings such as Shamshi-Adad I expanded Assyrian influence beyond the city of Ashur, establishing a foundation for future expansion. These early monarchs combined military prowess with administrative skill, laying the groundwork for what would later become one of the most formidable empires of the ancient world. Despite occasional periods of decline, the Assyrians maintained a strong core identity that allowed them to recover and regroup after setbacks. Trade was another vital component of early Assyrian society. Positioned along key trade routes, Assyrian merchants engaged in commerce with neighboring regions, exchanging textiles, metals, and agricultural goods. This not only brought wealth, but also exposed the Assyrians to a wide array of cultural and technological influences. The integration of foreign elements was evident in their art, writing, and religious practices, although they maintained a distinct cultural identity throughout. Their early writing system, adapted from cuneiform, facilitated record-keeping and the administration of a growing state. In conclusion, the origins of the Assyrian people are deeply embedded in the ancient history of Mesopotamia. From humble beginnings in the city of Ashur, they forged a civilization that balanced tradition with innovation. Their early settlements, characterized by resilience, religious devotion, and strategic foresight, laid the foundation for what would become a dominant force in the ancient world. The legacy of these early Assyrians continues to be studied and admired, reflecting the enduring significance of their contributions to human history. Geography and strategic location of Assyria. The ancient kingdom of Assyria was one of the most formidable and influential civilizations of the ancient Near East. Its geography and strategic location played a significant role in its rise as a military powerhouse and cultural center. Assyria was located in the northern part of Mesopotamia, largely within the bounds of modern-day northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey, and parts of northeastern Syria. This region is characterized by a combination of rugged highlands and fertile river valleys, offering both natural defenses and agricultural productivity. The Tigris River, in particular, was central to Assyrian life. Flowing through the heart of the empire, it provided a crucial water source and a means of transportation and communication, binding the cities of the empire together. The capital cities of Assyria, including Ashur, Nineveh, and later Kalhu, Nimrud, were strategically placed along the Tigris River. This allowed them to flourish economically and maintain effective administrative control over vast territories. The location also provided easy access to trade routes that connected the Assyrian heartland to Anatolia, the Levant, Persia, and the Arabian Peninsula. These trade links enriched the Assyrian economy and facilitated the exchange of goods, technologies, and ideas. The region's fertile plains allowed for abundant agricultural production, which supported a large population and enabled the development of complex urban centers. Additionally, the availability of natural resources such as stone for construction, metals for tools and weapons, and timber from nearby forests contributed to the infrastructure and military strength of the empire. Assyria's location between the highlands of Armenia and the flat plains of southern Mesopotamia meant it was positioned as a gateway between diverse regions. This centrality gave the Assyrians not only the advantage of access, but also the necessity to defend against potential invasions. The empire developed a sophisticated military and fortified its cities with impressive defenses. The surrounding terrain, including mountains to the north and deserts to the south, served as natural barriers that both protected the core of the empire and directed the expansionist ambitions of its rulers. The strategic importance of controlling the upper Tigris River Valley meant that Assyrian rulers focused their campaigns on securing buffer zones and controlling key choke points, ensuring safe passage for armies and merchants alike. The geographical positioning of Assyria also influenced its climate and agriculture. The region experiences seasonal rainfall, which, combined with the use of irrigation systems developed by the Assyrians, allowed for consistent crop production. Wheat, barley, dates, and vegetables formed the staple diet, while the surrounding pastures supported livestock. These resources not only fed the population, but also supported military campaigns by supplying food and transportation animals. The surplus production enabled the state to collect taxes in kind and maintain a standing army, which was a cornerstone of Assyrian power. In terms of political strategy, the location allowed the Assyrians to dominate neighboring regions by exerting influence over both nomadic tribes and settled peoples. By controlling the headwaters of the Tigris and other rivers, the Assyrians held a vital advantage in both diplomacy and conflict. The empire's geographical advantage extended to psychological warfare as well, with the imposing cities and vast road networks showcasing the reach and organizational skill of the Assyrian administration. The layout of cities like Nineveh, with its impressive walls, palaces, and temples, demonstrated both wealth and power, sending a clear message to both allies and adversaries. As the empire expanded, the strategic location allowed the Assyrians to establish provincial outposts and administrative centers across a wide territory, from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the mountains of Iran in the east. These regions were linked by a system of roads and messengers, enhancing control and coordination. This network ensured rapid deployment of troops and efficient communication, further strengthening the unity and resilience of the empire. In essence, the geography and strategic location of Assyria were central to its emergence as a dominant force. It provided both the physical means and the geopolitical leverage needed for the Assyrians to establish one of the most enduring legacies in ancient history. Old Assyrian Period, Trade and Diplomacy, c. 2025. 1365 BCE. The Old Assyrian Period, spanning roughly from 2025 to 1365 BCE, marks a foundational era in the development of Assyrian civilization, characterized by dynamic trade networks and sophisticated diplomacy. Emerging in the wake of the fall of the Ur-3 dynasty, Assur, the city at the heart of Assyria, began to assert its independence and evolve into a significant center of commerce and governance. This period laid the groundwork for what would later become one of the most powerful empires in the ancient Near East. During these centuries, Assyria's influence grew not through military conquest, but through calculated trade and diplomatic relations that extended across Mesopotamia and into Anatolia. One of the most defining features of the Old Assyrian period was the establishment of long-distance trade routes, particularly with the region of Anatolia, present-day Turkey. Assyrian merchants created an extensive network of commercial outposts known as karam, the most prominent of which was located at Kanesh, modern-day Kultepe. These trade colonies were not merely marketplaces, but functioning communities that included homes, offices, and storage facilities. They operated under mutually beneficial agreements with local Anatolian rulers, allowing Assyrian merchants to conduct their business under the protection of local authorities. This arrangement fostered a unique blend of cultures and laid the foundation for peaceful international trade practices long before the concept of modern diplomacy emerged. The trade between Assyria and Anatolia focused primarily on the exchange of textiles and tin, commodities of great value in the Bronze Age. Assyrians exported fine woolen garments and imported silver and other precious materials. Tin was especially crucial, as it was necessary for the production of bronze, a metal central to tools, weapons, and various artifacts of the era. The precision with which the trade routes were managed, including the use of written contracts, seals, and complex credit systems, highlights the advanced level of economic organization in Old Assyrian society. Assyrian merchants maintained detailed records on clay tablets, many of which have been recovered from archaeological sites, and provide vital insight into the daily operations and legal frameworks of this ancient economy. In addition to their commercial success, the Old Assyrians demonstrated considerable diplomatic acumen. Assyrian rulers and merchants alike engaged in negotiations that balanced political autonomy with economic interdependence. The rulers of Ashur maintained correspondence with leaders in Anatolia and beyond, ensuring the security and prosperity of their trade networks. Marriage alliances, tribute systems, and mutual defense agreements were all part of the diplomatic toolkit employed to maintain harmony and stability. These diplomatic endeavors were not always formalized in grand treaties, but were often embedded in commercial and familial relationships that helped foster long-term alliances and mutual trust. The city of Ashur itself played a central role not only as the origin point of trade caravans, but also as a religious and cultural hub. While the Assyrians of this period were pragmatic traders and diplomats, they also held deep religious convictions that influenced their worldview and interactions with other peoples. The city's patron deity, Ashur, was venerated as the divine protector of the city and its interests. This spiritual connection often underscored the legitimacy of Assur's commercial and political activities, providing a divine justification for expansion and engagement beyond its borders. The governance system of the Old Assyrian period was also notable for its administrative sophistication. While the kings held ultimate authority, there was a notable role for councils of elders and other civic bodies in decision-making processes. Merchants operated with a level of independence that suggests a proto-corporate structure, with investment groups and risk-sharing practices common in their ventures. This level of economic freedom, paired with institutional oversight, contributed to the resilience and growth of Assyrian commerce during this era. Over time, the pressures of shifting political alliances and emerging regional powers would eventually lead to the decline of the Old Assyrian trading system. Yet, the legacy of this period endured in the institutional memory of later Assyrian empires. The organizational principles, diplomatic strategies, and trade practices developed between 2025 and 1365 BCE served as a model for subsequent generations. Far from being a time of obscurity, The Old Assyrian period represents a chapter of remarkable ingenuity, foresight, and adaptability. It stands as a testament to the potential of peaceful enterprise and cultural exchange in shaping the course of history. Rise of Ashur-uballit I and emergence as a regional power. The rise of Ashur-uballit I marked a turning point in the history of ancient Mesopotamia and the dawn of a new era for the Assyrian state. Before his ascent to power in the mid-14th century BCE, Assyria had been largely overshadowed by more dominant neighbors, particularly the Mitanni kingdom to the west and south. The region around the city of Ashur had long maintained a distinct cultural and political identity, but it lacked the territorial breadth and diplomatic stature of greater empires. However, under Ashur-uballit I, Assyria transitioned from a provincial polity to a formidable regional power, laying the foundation for what would eventually become the mighty Assyrian Empire. Ashur-uballit I came to the throne during a period of regional instability and shifting alliances. The Mitanni kingdom, once dominant in northern Mesopotamia, was in decline due to both internal strife and external pressure, particularly from the rising Hittite Empire. This presented an opportunity that Ashur-uballit I seized with both strategic foresight and political acumen. Recognizing the vulnerability of Mitanni, he launched a series of calculated campaigns to undermine its influence and assert Assyrian independence. These efforts culminated in significant territorial expansion and the eventual subjugation of Mitanni strongholds, bringing much of northern Mesopotamia under Assyrian control. What set Ashur-uballit I apart was not merely his military capability, but his skillful diplomacy. He understood that lasting influence required more than conquest. It demanded recognition from other major powers. He engaged with Egypt, Babylon, and the Hittites through correspondences and marriage alliances. One of the most notable instances was his diplomatic exchange with the Egyptian pharaoh, documented in the Amarna letters. These communications highlight Assyria's rising status as Ashur-uballit I was no longer content to be a vassal or junior partner. He demanded to be seen as an equal among the great kings of the Near East. This shift in perception was revolutionary and set the tone for Assyria's future engagements with the world beyond its borders. Internally, Ashur-uballit I initiated reforms that strengthened the administrative and military infrastructure of his kingdom. He reorganized the army, established fortified cities, and improved the governance of newly acquired territories. His reign saw increased agricultural productivity and trade, fostering economic stability that supported military campaigns and construction projects. The city of Ashur became a center of administration and culture, reflecting the growing confidence and ambition of the Assyrian state. Monumental building efforts, including temple restorations and city walls, served both practical and symbolic purposes, reinforcing the authority of the king and the divine favor believed to accompany his rule. The legacy of Ashur-uballit I also included a transformation in how kingship was perceived in Assyria. No longer was the Assyrian ruler seen as merely a city-state leader. He was now a representative of divine will, with a mandate to expand and protect his realm. This ideological evolution contributed to the eventual militaristic character of later Assyrian rulers, who would push the boundaries of the empire across the Near East. His assertion of independence from Mitanni also set a precedent that encouraged future kings to resist subjugation and pursue dominance rather than submission. Ashur-uballit I's rise was not without resistance. The Babylonians, wary of Assyria's growing strength, sought to curb its influence through political maneuvering and, at times, direct conflict. Nevertheless, Ashur-uballit I managed to install his grandson on the Babylonian throne, extending Assyrian influence into southern Mesopotamia and showcasing his deft use of both military force and dynastic politics. This act not only expanded Assyrian reach but also integrated it more fully into the geopolitical web of the region, making it a key player in the affairs of the ancient Near East. In conclusion, the reign of Ashur-uballit I marked the transformation of Assyria from a subordinate state to an emerging power with regional ambitions. Through military conquest, diplomatic engagement, administrative reform, and ideological innovation, he redefined the trajectory of Assyrian history. His legacy endured long after his reign, inspiring successive generations of rulers to expand and consolidate what he had begun. The foundations he laid would ultimately support one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world, and his name remains etched in history as the architect of Assyria's rise. Middle Assyrian Empire. Military expansion and administration. The Middle Assyrian Empire, which flourished between approximately 1392 and 934 BCE, marked a transformative period in Mesopotamian history, characterized by remarkable military expansion and a sophisticated administrative structure. Emerging after the decline of the Mitanni kingdom and the weakening of neighboring powers, Assyria seized the opportunity to assert itself as a dominant regional force. Under rulers such as Ashur-uballit I, Adad-nirari I, Shalmaneser I, and Tiglath-Pileser I, the empire extended its influence far beyond its original boundaries, evolving into a formidable military power with a centralized and effective system of governance. The military success of the Middle Assyrian Empire was largely attributed to its well-organized and professional army. The Assyrian military employed a combination of infantry, cavalry, and chariotry, coordinated with precision and discipline. Their warriors were equipped with iron weapons, a technological advancement that offered them superiority over many contemporaries still reliant on bronze. Campaigns were conducted with strategic foresight, often focusing on weakening enemy strongholds before moving deeper into hostile territories. Notably, the use of siege warfare became a hallmark of Assyrian tactics. The army would systematically isolate cities, construct ramps, and breach defenses with battering rams, showcasing not just brute strength, but also engineering expertise. As conquests extended across Mesopotamia, Syria, and parts of Anatolia, the need for a structured administration became paramount. The Assyrians instituted a centralized bureaucracy to manage the vast territories under their control. Local governors, often appointed from the Assyrian nobility or trusted military leaders, were tasked with maintaining order, collecting tribute, and ensuring loyalty to the king. These officials operated under the direct oversight of the central authority in Ashur, the empire's political and religious heart. The integration of conquered peoples was managed through policies of resettlement and assimilation. Rather than annihilating defeated populations, the Assyrians frequently deported and redistributed communities across the empire to reduce the chances of rebellion and to stimulate economic activity in underpopulated regions. The Middle Assyrian legal and administrative systems were codified and inscribed, reflecting a deliberate move toward institutional governance. The Middle Assyrian laws, though strict and hierarchical, outlined roles, responsibilities, and punishments in society, reinforcing social order and royal authority. Administrative tablets recovered from various sites revealed detailed records of agricultural yields, labor deployment, and resource allocation, underscoring the complexity and efficiency of imperial management. The scribal class played a crucial role in maintaining this system, serving both as bureaucrats and record keepers. Religious ideology was tightly interwoven with governance and military conquest. The king was not only a political leader but also the representative of the chief deity Ashur. Military campaigns were often framed as divine missions, and victories were seen as evidence of divine favor. Temples served both as religious centers and administrative hubs, reinforcing the link between spiritual and state power. This fusion of roles justified expansion and helped maintain cohesion among diverse populations within the empire. Despite its strengths, the Middle Assyrian Empire was not without challenges. Rebellions in distant provinces, pressure from external powers such as the Arameans, and internal succession disputes occasionally disrupted the stability of the realm. Nonetheless, the institutional frameworks and military innovations developed during this period laid the foundation for the later Neo-Assyrian Empire, which would rise to even greater prominence in the first millennium BCE. The legacy of the Middle Assyrian Empire lies in its successful fusion of military might and administrative sophistication, which enabled it to exert influence over a vast and culturally diverse region for several centuries. In summation, the Middle Assyrian Empire was a powerhouse of its time, blending martial prowess with bureaucratic ingenuity. Its disciplined army and innovative strategies enabled rapid territorial gains, while its structured administration ensured sustainable control over conquered lands. Through efficient governance, legal codification, and the strategic use of religion, the Assyrians created a resilient imperial model that not only secured their dominance during the Middle Assyrian period, but also paved the way for the rise of future empires in the ancient Near East. Law and governance under the Middle Assyrian Empire. The Middle Assyrian Empire, which flourished from around 1392 to 934 BCE, laid the groundwork for one of the most formidable imperial systems in the ancient Near East. During this era, the empire witnessed a significant evolution in its administrative structure, legal principles, and methods of governance. Rulers such as Ashur-uballit I were instrumental in centralizing authority and establishing systems that maintained order across their expanding realm. Governance and law were deeply interlinked, with the legal system reinforcing the power and policies of the state. Central to Middle Assyrian governance was the supremacy of the king. The monarch was not just a political figure but also carried religious significance, acting as a representative of the divine order. This dual role gave his decisions both legal and spiritual weight, reinforcing his authority across all sectors of society. Kings appointed governors and high officials to oversee provinces and maintain the smooth functioning of state administration. These officials, often drawn from the elite, managed tax collection, law enforcement, and local governance, and were expected to report regularly to the central government. A major legacy of this era is the Middle Assyrian Laws, a codified collection of legal texts that sheds light on societal values and legal practices. These laws addressed a broad range of issues, from property and family matters to trade and criminal behavior. They were often strict, with punishments ranging from fines and flogging to mutilation and death. The harshness was meant to serve as a deterrent and to underline the authority of the law. Although the society was patriarchal, the legal code included specific provisions for women. Women could own property, enter into contracts, and appear in court, although their rights remained limited compared to men. A hallmark of Middle Assyrian governance was its emphasis on record-keeping. Scribes played a vital administrative role, recording legal decisions, economic data, and royal decrees on clay tablets in cuneiform script. These records were stored in state archives and used to support consistent governance. The empire also developed an efficient communication system that allowed for quick transmission of information between the capital and distant provinces. This helped the central authority stay informed and responsive to local developments. Religious institutions were closely tied to the machinery of governance. Temples were not only religious centers but also economic entities. High-ranking priests, often appointed by the king, managed temple lands and collected offerings, serving both the gods and the state. This fusion of religious and political power helped solidify the king's legitimacy and unify the empire ideologically. Rituals conducted in the temples often emphasized loyalty to the king and the divine protection over the empire. The Assyrians also expressed their authority through architecture and visual representation. Grand palaces, temples, and administrative buildings were constructed in key cities, symbolizing state power and organization. Wall reliefs and inscriptions depicted military conquests, ceremonies, and the enforcement of law. These displays served as propaganda, reminding citizens and subjects of the might and justice of the Assyrian rulers. Visual narratives were an important tool in reinforcing social order and obedience to authority. Legal and administrative flexibility was another aspect of Middle Assyrian governance. As the empire expanded, it absorbed diverse populations and cultures. Local customs were occasionally acknowledged in legal decisions, provided they did not challenge royal authority. This adaptability helped maintain control over distant territories without completely disrupting local traditions. The ability to combine centralized rule with localized management was key to the empire's endurance. Throughout the Middle Assyrian period, the integration of legal authority with administrative competence created a system that was both structured and resilient. Justice was portrayed as an extension of the king's will, and the legal framework reflected the social and moral values of the time. While the laws were strict, they offered a clear guide to acceptable behavior, contributing to internal stability and social order. In summary, the Middle Assyrian Empire built a robust system of governance based on legal precision, centralized authority, and religious legitimacy. This system enabled it to manage a vast and varied population effectively. The principles and structures developed during this era would leave a lasting impact, influencing the administrative and legal traditions of future empires in the region. Art, architecture, and religion in early Assyria. Art, architecture, and religion in early Assyria formed an inseparable triad that shaped the identity and legacy of one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient Near East. The early Assyrian period, spanning roughly from the 25th to the 10th century BCE, saw the rise of cultural practices that laid the foundation for later imperial grandeur. Rooted in Mesopotamian traditions, yet distinct in execution and symbolism, Assyrian contributions in these spheres reveal a society deeply attuned to divine authority, military might, and artistic expression. The artistic achievements of early Assyria reflect both utilitarian and ceremonial purposes. Unlike later periods marked by large-scale narrative reliefs, early Assyrian art was subtler, often confined to decorative patterns, carved seals, and small statuary. These artifacts were not merely ornamental, but held symbolic meanings tied to spiritual beliefs and royal authority. Stone and clay were the most common materials, fashioned into images of deities, mythical creatures, and stylized motifs. Cylinder seals, for instance, were intricately engraved and used to stamp documents, signifying ownership and divine witness. These small items carried immense value, both administratively and spiritually. Architecture in early Assyria was primarily functional, yet embedded with spiritual significance. The earliest settlements, such as Ashur, the city that gave the empire its name, displayed rudimentary urban planning characterized by mud brick construction, fortified walls, and communal temples. Although the materials were perishable, the scale and layout of these buildings suggest a conscious effort to represent order, power, and divine favor. Temples were the focal point of early Assyrian cities, positioned centrally and elevated on platforms to signify their importance. These structures were often decorated with clay cones and frescoes, serving both as places of worship and as administrative hubs. Palaces began to emerge as separate from temples, reflecting the growing power of kings and their desire to display authority independently of religious institutions. Religion in early Assyria was a cornerstone of societal structure, influencing nearly every aspect of daily life. The pantheon of gods closely mirrored that of Sumer and Akkad, with Ashur becoming the chief deity. Over time, Ashur evolved from a local god into a national symbol, representing divine kingship, military conquest, and cosmic order. The divine right of kings was a recurring theme, legitimizing rulers through religious rituals and temple offerings. Kings acted as intermediaries between the gods and the people, a role reflected in inscriptions, dedicatory objects, and temple architecture. This connection to the divine was not only spiritual but also political, reinforcing centralized authority through sacred imagery. Ritual practices in early Assyria were performed with precision and reverence. These included offerings, seasonal festivals, and purification ceremonies designed to maintain cosmic harmony and appease divine forces. Temples functioned as both religious and economic centers, with priests and scribes managing agricultural surplus, land ownership, and legal matters. Art and religious practice often intertwined, as seen in votive statues that were placed in temples to represent perpetual prayer and devotion. These statues, crafted in a stylized yet expressive manner, communicated the piety of the worshipper and the cultural ideals of the time. The development of writing, particularly cuneiform script, facilitated the recording of religious texts, economic transactions, and royal decrees. Early Assyrian inscriptions often praised the gods, recorded building projects, and chronicled military achievements, all of which were believed to be sanctioned by divine will. These writings were etched into clay tablets and stone stelae, many of which have survived to offer insight into Assyrian belief systems and governance. Religious ideology was thus preserved and propagated through both textual and visual means, reinforcing a unified cultural identity. In early Assyria, art, architecture, and religion were deeply interconnected, each reinforcing the other to sustain a cohesive society. Artistic motifs conveyed spiritual truths, architectural forms embodied religious function and political control, and religious practices shaped both private devotion and public policy. This unity of expression created a resilient foundation for the future expansion of Assyrian power and influence. The legacy of early Assyrian culture, though often overshadowed by its later imperial phase, stands as a testament to the civilization's ingenuity, devotion, and vision in harmonizing the material and the divine. Neo-Assyrian Empire. The era of empire. Building 911–609 BCE. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, spanning from 911 to 609 BCE, marked a transformative era in the ancient Near East, defined by aggressive expansion, administrative innovation, and cultural flourishing. Emerging after a period of relative decline, the Assyrians rose to dominate a vast expanse of territory that included Mesopotamia, parts of Anatolia, the Levant, and even Egypt for a time. Their rise was not merely a return to power but a complete reimagining of empire building, characterized by strategic military campaigns, infrastructure development, and a centralized system of governance. At the heart of the Neo-Assyrian success was a highly organized and disciplined military. This force was among the most advanced of its time, incorporating iron weaponry, siege engines, and cavalry units, which allowed the Assyrians to conduct large-scale campaigns with remarkable efficiency. Under kings such as Ashur-nasirpal II, Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and Ashurbanipal, the empire expanded its borders through conquest, diplomacy, and intimidation. These rulers were not only military strategists, but also administrators who understood the importance of integrating diverse populations into a coherent imperial system. Ashur-nasirpal II set the stage by rebuilding Kalhu, modern-day Nimrud, as a grand capital, symbolizing the rebirth of Assyrian might. His campaigns into the Levant and Anatolia showcased a blend of calculated brutality and political negotiation. Tiglath-Pileser III reformed the military and administrative apparatus, creating a standing army and introducing provincial governors answerable to the king, thus tightening central control. His policies enabled more effective governance of conquered territories and curbed the autonomy of regional rulers, ensuring loyalty to the Assyrian throne. Sargon II further strengthened the empire by relocating rebellious populations and installing loyal administrators in key regions. His establishment of Dur-Sharrukin as a new capital reflected both his ambition and the Assyrian emphasis on monumental architecture as a display of power. His successor, Sennacherib, famously sacked Babylon and launched a campaign against Judah, an event later echoed in various historical and religious texts. Sennacherib's construction projects, particularly the renovation of Nineveh and the creation of an extensive canal system, demonstrated the empire's capacity for urban development and resource management. Esarhaddon, Sennacherib's son, reversed his father's stance on Babylon by rebuilding the city and fostering a policy of appeasement towards southern Mesopotamia. His campaigns reached into Egypt, marking the zenith of Assyrian territorial control. Ashurbanipal, the last great king, presided over a flourishing of culture and knowledge, establishing the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, which preserved a wealth of Mesopotamian literature, science, and religion for future generations. His reign saw a delicate balance of war and culture, with victories in Elam and continued pressure on Egypt, while also encouraging the arts and scholarship. Despite its formidable strength, the Neo-Assyrian Empire eventually began to unravel due to a combination of internal strife, overextension, and the rising pressure from external enemies. Successive revolts, combined with the costly maintenance of a sprawling empire, eroded the centralized authority that had held the realm together. After Ashurbanipal's death, the empire weakened significantly, with competing claimants to the throne and increasing dissatisfaction among subjected peoples. In the late 7th century BCE, a coalition of Medes, Babylonians, and Scythians launched decisive attacks that culminated in the fall of Nineveh in 612 BCE and the final collapse of the empire by 609 BCE. The legacy of the Neo-Assyrian Empire remains profound. It was a pioneering force in the art of empire building, setting precedents in military strategy, governance, and cultural integration that influenced later civilizations. Its monumental architecture, intricate reliefs, and administrative records offer a detailed portrait of a society deeply invested in projecting authority and order. While its end was marked by violence and fragmentation, the contributions of the Neo-Assyrians to statecraft and historical memory endured long after the empire's demise, preserved in archaeological remains and written records that continue to captivate scholars and audiences to this day. Ashur-nasir-pal II and the founding of Kalhu, Nimrud. Ashur-nasir-pal II, one of the most formidable kings of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, reigned from 883 to 859 BCE. His era marked a decisive turning point in the history of Assyria, as he revived and expanded the empire's power through military might, administrative reform, and monumental building projects. Among his most enduring achievements was the founding and transformation of Kalhu, known today as Nimrud, into the new capital of the Assyrian Empire. This deliberate shift not only reflected his ambition but also showcased the strategic and symbolic importance he placed on reasserting Assyrian dominance in the ancient Near East. Kalhu had existed before Ashur-nasir-pal's reign, but it was a relatively minor settlement until he chose it as the center of his imperial power. The city's location along the Tigris River made it ideal for trade, communication, and control over surrounding regions. Recognizing this potential, Ashur-nasir-pal undertook a massive urban development campaign, turning Kalhu into a dazzling seat of government, military organization, and religious authority. The city's reconstruction was an immense feat, involving extensive labor, engineering skill, and centralized planning. He employed a vast workforce, including captives taken from his numerous military campaigns, to build massive walls, canals, temples, palaces, and administrative centers. At the heart of Kalhu stood the Northwest Palace, Ashur-nasir-pal's grand residence and the symbolic epicenter of his rule. It was adorned with impressive reliefs that not only depicted the king's military victories and divine connections, but also served as political propaganda to reinforce his power. These stone carvings, many of which survive today, display detailed scenes of battles, royal hunts, religious rituals, and ceremonial processions. They reflect a vision of a ruler who is both a warrior and a servant of the divine, with a clear emphasis on order, authority, and cultural supremacy. Ashur-nasir-pal II's military campaigns greatly contributed to the resources and manpower required for Kalhu's transformation. He led numerous expeditions to the north and west, reaching as far as the Mediterranean. These campaigns brought not only wealth in the form of tribute and spoils, but also expanded Assyrian territory and influence across a vast region. The success of these conquests was carefully documented and carved into the very walls of his new capital, ensuring that the memory of his achievements would be preserved for generations. His military prowess also served a practical function, ensuring a steady supply of workers, artisans, and resources needed for the colossal construction efforts in Kalhu. Religion played a crucial role in Ashur-nasir-pal's statecraft, and Kalhu was designed to reflect this. The city was home to grand temples dedicated to the chief Assyrian deity Ashur, as well as to other important gods, such as Ninurta and Ishtar. By integrating religious institutions into the capital's fabric, Ashur-nasir-pal aligned his reign with divine sanction, strengthening his legitimacy. Priestly elites and ritual practices became part of the administrative machinery, reinforcing the connection between divine will and royal authority. The relocation of the capital to Kalhu also had administrative significance. By distancing himself from the old capital, Ashur, Ashur-nisirpal II created a fresh center of governance, free from entrenched power structures and opposition. Kalhu became a hub of imperial administration, housing officials, scribes, and governors who executed the king's policies. It served as a nerve center for communication across the empire and played a key role in maintaining control over distant provinces. The scale and ambition of Kalhu's construction reflected not only the wealth of the empire, but also Ashur-nisirpal's vision of a centralized and culturally dominant Assyrian state. The city stood as a symbol of imperial strength and unity, embodying the ideals of order, conquest, and religious devotion. Through Kalhu, Ashur-nisirpal II projected a new image of King Shipone that was militarily successful, divinely guided, and culturally sophisticated. His reign laid the foundation for future Assyrian kings, who would follow in his footsteps and further expand the empire's influence. Ashur-nisirpal II's legacy lives on through the ruins and artifacts of Kalhu, which continue to reveal the grandeur and complexity of his rule. His decision to establish Kalhu as the capital transformed it into a lasting symbol of Assyrian identity and power, marking his reign as a defining chapter in the history of the ancient Near East. Shalmaneser III and the struggles with the Western coalition. Shalmaneser III, the powerful king of Assyria, who reigned from 859 to 824 BCE, is remembered for his aggressive military campaigns and unrelenting expansionist policy. His reign marked a critical phase in the evolution of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, characterized by both triumphs and challenges, especially in the western regions where he encountered strong resistance from a formidable alliance known as the Western Coalition. This coalition, comprised of various Levantine states and tribal confederations, stood as a rare instance of unified defiance against the might of Assyria. The Western territories, rich in trade routes and valuable resources, were of strategic interest to Shalmaneser III. Determined to bring these lands under his control, he launched a series of campaigns aimed at subduing the region. In 853 BCE, he led a significant military expedition that culminated in the famous Battle of Karkar. This confrontation, detailed in Assyrian inscriptions, saw Shalmaneser face a broad alliance that included King Hadadezer of Damascus, King Ahab of Israel, and leaders from Hamath, Aram, and other local powers. Despite claiming victory in his records, the reality of the battle appears more complex. The fact that the Assyrian advance was halted and required repeated campaigns in subsequent years suggests that the coalition achieved a tactical success in resisting domination, at least temporarily. The resilience of the Western coalition was noteworthy. Though these states often had conflicting interests, the growing threat of Assyrian encroachment compelled them to unite in a rare display of regional solidarity. Their combined forces at Karkar numbered in the tens of thousands, bringing together infantry, cavalry, and chariots from across the Levant. Shalmaneser's account, inscribed on his monolith of Kirk, emphasizes the scale of the engagement and his claimed victories. Yet, the need for him to return to the region multiple times indicates that the coalition's resistance was not easily broken. Over the following decades, Shalmaneser continued his military expeditions westward. Each campaign drained resources and manpower, revealing the limitations of even a powerful empire like Assyria when confronted with determined opposition and challenging geography. The Levantine terrain, with its hills, fortified cities, and fragmented political landscape, made it difficult for any single power to establish uncontested dominance. Nonetheless, Shalmaneser persisted, laying siege to cities, extracting tribute, and attempting to fracture the alliance through both warfare and diplomacy. Despite the ongoing struggle, Assyria managed to exert growing influence over parts of the region. Some states, realizing the futility of prolonged resistance, opted to pay tribute in exchange for autonomy. Others, like Damascus and Israel, found themselves repeatedly caught between resistance and accommodation, often reshaping their alliances depending on the shifting power dynamics. The campaigns led by Shalmaneser not only aimed at territorial conquest, but also served to reinforce the image of Assyrian supremacy, both to foreign rulers and within the empire itself. Shalmaneser III also made use of monumental art and inscriptions to project his authority and intimidate potential adversaries. Reliefs and written records commemorated his campaigns, showing defeated enemies and listing the vast array of tribute brought back to Assyria. These representations served as political tools, reinforcing his legitimacy and showcasing the empire's strength to future generations. However, they also reflect the constant resistance he faced, particularly from the Western Front, which never fully succumbed during his reign. As Shalmaneser aged, internal instability within Assyria began to surface, further complicating his efforts in the West. A succession crisis and the rise of local governors with growing autonomy weakened central authority. By the end of his rule, while much of the Western campaign zone had been ravaged and subjugated to various degrees, total and lasting control remained elusive. His struggle with the Western coalition highlights the enduring complexity of imperial ambition in the ancient world, a tale not just of conquest, but of resistance, negotiation, and the limits of power. The legacy of these confrontations persisted beyond Shalmaneser's reign. They laid the groundwork for future Assyrian policies in the region, and demonstrated the need for both military strength and strategic alliances. Shalmaneser III's campaigns against the Western coalition remain a vivid chapter in the annals of Near Eastern history, illustrating the turbulent dynamics between empire and resistance in the ancient world. Tiglath-Pileser III, Military Reforms and Imperial Efficiency. Tiglath-Pileser III, one of the most formidable rulers of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, reigned from 745 to 727 BCE, and stands out in ancient history for his revolutionary military reforms and administrative ingenuity. His reign marked a turning point in the development of the Assyrian Empire, transforming it from a loosely held collection of vassal states into a centralized and efficient imperial machine. Recognizing the limitations of prior Assyrian military structures, Tiglath-Pileser III overhauled the army, professionalized its ranks, and created a standing force capable of rapid deployment and sustained campaigns, which proved crucial for territorial expansion and control. Before Tiglath-Pileser III's reign, the Assyrian military largely depended on conscripted troops who returned to their fields after the campaigning season. This practice hindered the kingdom's ability to maintain a permanent military presence in far-off regions. By introducing a standing army, composed of full-time soldiers and supported by a robust logistical framework, Tiglath-Pileser III ensured a constant state of readiness. The inclusion of foreign mercenaries and specialized units, such as cavalry and siege engineers, added a new dimension to Assyrian warfare. These enhancements allowed for flexibility, quick mobilization, and sustained warfare, often overwhelming enemies who relied on slower, seasonal militias. His use of iron weaponry, improved armor, and well-coordinated battle tactics elevated the Assyrian military to an unmatched level of effectiveness in the region. The ability to conduct siege warfare with precision and the strategic placement of military garrisons across newly conquered territories established long-term control. He pioneered a strategy of dividing larger provinces into smaller, more manageable districts, each overseen by royal governors accountable directly to the king. This structural shift reduced the power of local nobility, curbed internal rebellions, and ensured loyalty to the central authority. Tiglath-Pileser III also implemented administrative reforms that streamlined governance and strengthened imperial cohesion. He replaced hereditary provincial officials with appointed governors whose performance and allegiance were closely monitored. These changes were aimed at reducing corruption, enhancing accountability, and ensuring efficient tax collection, which funded both military operations and internal development. Records indicate that these governors had regular reporting obligations and were frequently rotated to prevent them from building independent power bases. The empire under Tiglath-Pileser III expanded rapidly, incorporating regions such as Syria, parts of Anatolia, and much of Mesopotamia. His campaigns were marked by strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency, often combining psychological tactics with brute force. The policy of mass deportations, though harsh, was calculated to weaken resistance and repopulate depopulated areas with loyal subjects. These population transfers helped dilute local identities, reducing the likelihood of uprisings, while also boosting the empire's manpower and agricultural productivity. Tiglath-Pileser III was not merely a conqueror. He was a statesman who understood the importance of integrating diverse populations into a unified administrative system. He promoted the use of Akkadian as the lingua franca and employed a sophisticated network of roads and communication systems to facilitate control and dissemination of royal directives. These infrastructural developments enabled messages to travel swiftly across vast distances, reinforcing imperial authority and coordination. Furthermore, his emphasis on documentation and record-keeping demonstrated a forward-thinking approach to governance. Extensive annals, military dispatches, and administrative tablets from his reign provide valuable insights into how the empire functioned on a day-to-day basis. The clarity of these records suggests a high degree of organization and bureaucratic discipline, hallmarks of his administrative legacy. By the time of his death, Tiglath-Pileser III had not only secured the borders of the Assyrian Empire, but also laid the groundwork for future expansion under his successors. His blend of military innovation and administrative control became a blueprint for later empires in the ancient Near East. The enduring impact of his reign is reflected in the sustained dominance of Assyria for over a century after his death. Tiglath-Pileser III's era remains a prime example of how visionary leadership, when combined with structural reform and strategic execution, can elevate a kingdom into a formidable imperial power. Sargon II and the founding of Dur-Sharrukin. Sargon II, one of the most formidable rulers of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, ascended the throne in 722 BCE, under circumstances that remain a topic of historical inquiry. His rise followed the mysterious disappearance of Shalmaneser V, and although Sargon claimed to be of royal blood, no direct evidence ties him to previous kings, suggesting his ascent may have been the result of political maneuvering or military backing. Regardless of how he gained power, Sargon II proved to be an efficient and ambitious leader who left a lasting mark on the ancient world, particularly through the foundation of Dur-Sharrukin, his magnificent capital city. Early in his reign, Sargon embarked on a series of military campaigns aimed at securing the empire's frontiers and reasserting Assyrian dominance across a vast and often rebellious territory. From the mountainous regions of Urartu in the north to the coastal cities of the Levant, he successfully subdued numerous uprisings and expanded his influence. These conquests not only solidified his position as king, but also brought immense wealth and a flood of tribute to the empire. This newfound prosperity, in turn, gave him the means and motivation to construct a city that would reflect both his authority and the divine favor he claimed to enjoy. Dur-Sharrukin, which means Fortress of Sargon, was founded in 706 BCE near present-day Khorsabad in northern Iraq. The city was conceived as a symbol of power, order, and royal prestige. It was constructed rapidly, using the empire's vast resources and labor force, and designed with the precision and grandeur befitting a ruler of Sargon's stature. Massive walls enclosed the city, and within them stood temples, palaces, administrative buildings, and residential quarters, all laid out according to a meticulously planned grid. The architectural centerpiece of Dur-Sharrukin was Sargon's palace, an immense complex that embodied Assyrian artistry and engineering prowess. Decorated with intricate reliefs, towering Lamassu statues, and detailed inscriptions, the palace projected an aura of divine protection and royal legitimacy. The Lamassu, mythological creatures with human heads, lion or bull bodies, and wings, flanked the palace gates, believed to ward off evil and announce the might of the king. These motifs were not mere decoration. They were powerful political tools reinforcing Sargon's divine mandate to rule. Sargon intended Dur-Sharrukin not only as a political center but as a reflection of cosmic harmony, integrating religious, administrative, and military functions in a unified space. Temples dedicated to Assyrian gods were strategically placed to align with celestial patterns, reflecting the belief that the king governed in accordance with divine order. By constructing this city from the ground up, Sargon sought to break from the past and redefine his reign on his own terms, unbound by the traditions and legacy of previous rulers. Despite the monumental effort and resources invested in Dur-Sharrukin, the city's destiny was short-lived. In 705 BCE, just a year after its completion, Sargon was killed in battle during a campaign against the Sumerians. His body was never recovered, an ominous end that shook the spiritual confidence of the Assyrian court. His son and successor, Sennacherib, chose to abandon Dur-Sharrukin and move the capital to Nineveh, perhaps in an effort to distance himself from what was seen as an ill-fated endeavor. Today, the ruins of Dur-Sharrukin stand as a testament to Sargon II's vision and ambition. Archaeological excavations in the 19th and 20th centuries unearthed fragments of its former glory-massive walls, carved reliefs, and the remains of monumental buildings. These remnants provide critical insights into the political ideology, artistic achievements, and urban planning of the Neo-Assyrian period. Through them, historians have come to appreciate the calculated grandeur that characterized Sargon's rule. In retrospect, the founding of Dur-Sharrukin was not merely an act of urban development, but a strategic expression of kingship. It encapsulated Sargon II's desire to legitimize his authority, to project unyielding power, and to etch his name into the annals of history. Though the city flourished for only a brief moment, it remains one of the most striking examples of how architecture, politics, and ideology intersected in the ancient world. The Great Reign of Sennacherib and the Siege of Jerusalem. The reign of Sennacherib, king of Assyria from 705 to 681 BCE, stands as one of the most remarkable periods in ancient Mesopotamian history. Known for his military campaigns, administrative reforms, and grand architectural achievements, Sennacherib was a ruler of exceptional ambition and authority. He succeeded his father, Sargon II, and quickly asserted his dominance across the Near East. Sennacherib's legacy is often remembered for the dramatic siege of Jerusalem in 701 BCE, an event recorded not only in Assyrian annals but also in biblical texts and other historical sources. His reign encapsulates the power and complexity of the Assyrian Empire during its height. Sennacherib inherited a vast empire that demanded constant attention and military engagement. His early years as king were marked by revolts and resistance in several regions, including Babylon, Elam, and the Levant. He launched aggressive campaigns to suppress rebellions and reinforce Assyrian authority. A master of logistics and military strategy, Sennacherib led his armies with precision, ensuring that distant provinces remained under firm control. His campaigns were meticulously documented in cuneiform inscriptions and palace reliefs, emphasizing not only his military success but also the might of the Assyrian state. These records portray a ruler determined to consolidate and expand his empire, using both force and calculated diplomacy. Among his most well-known military endeavors was the campaign against the kingdom of Judah. Hezekiah, king of Judah, had rebelled against Assyrian control, possibly encouraged by alliances with Egypt and other regional powers. In response, Sennacherib marched westward, subjugating numerous fortified cities in Judah and asserting his dominance throughout the region. His siege of Jerusalem became one of the most significant events of his reign. According to Assyrian sources, he trapped Hezekiah like a bird in a cage, surrounding the city with a powerful military force. However, despite the strength of the Assyrian army and their success in capturing other Judean cities, Jerusalem itself was not taken. The reasons behind the Assyrian withdrawal from Jerusalem remain a topic of scholarly debate. Assyrian inscriptions boast of victory and tribute, but they do not claim to have conquered the city. Biblical accounts, meanwhile, suggest that divine intervention or a plague may have struck the Assyrian camp, forcing them to retreat. Other historians theorize that political considerations or logistical constraints influenced Sennacherib's decision to leave the city untouched. Regardless of the cause, the fact remains that Jerusalem survived the siege, and Hezekiah retained his throne, though as a vassal under Assyrian influence. Sennacherib's reign was also marked by major architectural and infrastructural advancements, particularly in the capital city of Nineveh. He transformed Nineveh into a magnificent urban center, building new palaces, gardens, and temples. One of his most renowned projects was the construction of an advanced aqueduct system to bring water into the city, an engineering feat that demonstrated the sophistication of Assyrian innovation. His palace, often called the Palace Without Rival, was adorned with detailed reliefs depicting his campaigns and achievements. These artistic representations served both as historical records and as propaganda tools, reinforcing the king's divine right to rule and his power over his enemies. Despite his achievements, Sennacherib's reign ended in turmoil. His decision to favor one son, Esarhaddon, over others in the line of succession led to familial strife. In 681 BCE, he was assassinated by two of his sons in a palace coup. Esarhaddon eventually ascended to the throne and continued his father's legacy, though the internal conflict marked a bitter conclusion to Sennacherib's rule. Nevertheless, his influence on the Assyrian Empire and his impact on the history of the ancient Near East remain profound. The reign of Sennacherib is remembered for its combination of military strength, architectural brilliance, and the dramatic confrontation with Jerusalem. His actions reshaped the political landscape of the region and left an indelible mark on the historical and archaeological record. Through a mix of ambition, intelligence, and ruthlessness, Sennacherib established himself as one of the most formidable rulers of the ancient world. Esarhaddon and the conquest of Egypt. Esarhaddon, one of the most formidable kings of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, reigned from 681 to 669 BCE and left a significant mark on ancient history through his ambitious campaigns and strategic governance. Among his most notable military achievements was the conquest of Egypt, a feat that not only extended Assyrian influence far into Africa, but also altered the geopolitical landscape of the ancient Near East. His reign followed that of his father, Sennacherib, whose assassination led to a brutal succession conflict. Esarhaddon emerged victorious and inherited an empire in need of stabilization and expansion, which he pursued with both force and diplomacy. Recognizing Egypt as both a rival and an opportunity, Esarhaddon set his sights on its conquest. At the time, Egypt was under the rule of the 25th dynasty, led by the Kushite pharaoh Taharqa. The Kushite dynasty, originating from Nubia, had extended its control over Egypt and presented a significant challenge to Assyrian authority in the Levant. Esarhaddon viewed this influence as a direct threat to Assyrian dominance and trade networks. His initial campaigns into Egypt began with incursions into its border regions, testing defenses and gathering intelligence while subduing smaller territories loyal to Taharqa. In 675 BCE, Esarhaddon launched his first major expedition into Egyptian territory, but it was met with fierce resistance and ultimately ended in retreat due to logistical difficulties and stiff opposition. Unwilling to concede defeat, he returned to Assyria to regroup and strengthen his military apparatus. He reorganized his army, incorporating both Assyrian core units and allied contingents, while improving the supply lines and command structure essential for a long-distance campaign. By 671 BCE, he was ready for a more decisive push. This second invasion was meticulously planned and far more effective. Esarhaddon's army crossed the Sinai Peninsula, overcoming natural obstacles and enemy ambushes to advance into the Nile Delta. The campaign culminated in the capture of Memphis, a major Egyptian city and strategic stronghold. Taharqa was forced to flee south to Thebes, leaving Esarhaddon to claim a significant victory. The fall of Memphis symbolized the collapse of central Egyptian resistance and opened the door for Assyrian control over Lower Egypt. Rather than merely plundering the region, Esarhaddon implemented a systematic approach to governance. He appointed local governors and loyal officials to oversee Egyptian cities, balancing Assyrian authority with local traditions to minimize unrest. Administrative reforms ensured the extraction of tribute and maintenance of order, and Egyptian princes were taken to Assyria both as hostages and as instruments of acculturation. This method of indirect rule helped stabilize Assyrian presence in the region, at least temporarily. Esarhaddon commemorated his conquest through inscriptions and monuments that portrayed him as a divinely sanctioned ruler. These records emphasize the submission of Egypt and the Kushites, depicting the Assyrian king receiving tribute and offerings. Such propaganda not only reinforced his legitimacy at home, but also warned neighboring powers of the might and reach of Assyria. Despite this triumph, the occupation of Egypt proved difficult to maintain. Local revolts and the return of Taharqa in subsequent years challenged Assyrian control, demonstrating that conquest alone could not ensure long-term dominance. Nonetheless, Esarhaddon's campaign marked a pivotal moment in the history of imperial expansion. His success in Egypt represented the furthest extent of Assyrian military power and set a precedent for future rulers. Upon his death in 669 BCE, his carefully orchestrated succession plan placed his son Ashurbanipal on the throne, who continued efforts to control Egypt but faced similar resistance. Esarhaddon's brief occupation of Egypt revealed both the heights of Assyrian ambition and the limits of empire in a diverse and volatile region. Esarhaddon's conquest of Egypt was not just a military exploit, it was a calculated move in the larger game of imperial politics. It demonstrated the lengths to which the Neo-Assyrian Empire would go to protect its borders, expand its influence, and project power across vast distances. While ultimately short-lived, the campaign highlighted Esarhaddon's capability as both a warrior and a strategist, leaving a legacy that endured in Assyrian annals and reshaped the historical trajectory of the ancient world. Ashurbanipal, Scholar King, and the Library of Nineveh. Ashurbanipal, one of the last great kings of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, reigned from 669 to approximately 631 BCE. His legacy is marked not only by military conquest and political control, but also by his exceptional commitment to knowledge and culture. Among the many rulers of ancient Mesopotamia, Ashurbanipal stood out as a monarch, deeply engaged with intellectual pursuits. He was a rare combination of a warrior and a scholar, an emperor who both expanded his empire's borders and nurtured one of the ancient world's most significant repositories of knowledge, the Library of Nineveh. Born into a royal family, Ashurbanipal was uniquely educated for a future king. Unlike many rulers of his time, who relied solely on priests and scribes for knowledge, Ashurbanipal was literate and well-versed in various academic disciplines. He studied mathematics, divination, reading and writing, of cuneiform script, and the complex rituals of the Assyrian religion. This foundation in scholarly learning shaped his vision of kingship, where wisdom and governance were deeply intertwined. His education provided him not only with administrative skills but also with a profound appreciation for the cultural and historical records of his people. Ashurbanipal's reign was marked by successful military campaigns that maintained and extended Assyrian dominance across the Near East. His armies crushed rebellions and brought new territories under Assyrian control, securing vital trade routes and resources. Despite these achievements on the battlefield, what truly set Ashurbanipal apart was his passion for collecting texts and preserving the written word. He commissioned officials and scribes to travel across his empire and beyond to gather tablets from temples and libraries. His goal was to collect every significant piece of knowledge known to the Mesopotamian world and to store it in a single grand archive, the Library of Nineveh. The library, housed within his palace at Nineveh, was an extraordinary achievement. It contained tens of thousands of clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform, covering a vast array of subjects including literature, law, medicine, astronomy, religion, and rituals. Among its most famous holdings was the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest known literary works. The library also preserved bilingual dictionaries and administrative records, reflecting the diverse and multilingual nature of the empire. Ashurbanipal's efforts ensured that knowledge was not only preserved, but also systematized and accessible to future generations of scribes and scholars. What makes the Library of Nineveh especially significant is its role in preserving Mesopotamian civilization. Much of what modern historians know about Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria comes from texts found in this vast collection. The meticulous organization of the library, with cataloging systems and colophons marking the origin of texts, demonstrated an advanced understanding of archival methods. Ashurbanipal did not merely hoard texts. He created an institution dedicated to the accumulation and safeguarding of knowledge. His library was not intended for the general public but for elite scholars and priests who used its resources to guide religious practices, governance, and education. Ashurbanipal's vision of kingship as a fusion of might and intellect was unique in the ancient world. While he maintained a reputation as a fierce ruler, his commitment to cultural heritage has left a more enduring legacy. His inscriptions often boasted of his ability to read and understand ancient scripts, a source of great pride and a rarity among rulers of his era. In these texts, he described himself as the guardian of sacred knowledge, chosen by the gods to uphold divine wisdom. After his death, the Assyrian Empire gradually declined, and Nineveh eventually fell to invading forces. However, the library survived in part due to the durable nature of clay tablets. Excavations in the 19th century uncovered this treasure trove, stunning the modern world and reshaping the understanding of ancient history. Through the Library of Nineveh, Ashurbanipal's dream of preserving the cultural and intellectual achievements of his civilization was realized. His legacy as a scholar king endures not in the conquests he made but in the knowledge he preserved for future generations. Life in the Assyrian Empire. Society, roles, and daily life. Life in the Assyrian Empire was a complex and structured experience, shaped by the empire's military dominance, advanced administrative systems, and deeply rooted traditions. Spanning centuries and covering a vast territory across Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. Its society was hierarchical, with a clearly defined class system that influenced every aspect of daily life, from occupation and education to religious practices and family roles. At the top of the Assyrian social structure was the king, who was viewed not only as a political leader but also as the representative of divine authority on earth. His power was absolute, and he was responsible for maintaining order, expanding the empire, and upholding the god's will. Beneath him were the nobles and high officials, many of whom were close relatives or loyal subjects, entrusted with governance, military command, and religious duties. These elites enjoyed privileges such as land ownership, wealth, and political influence. Their estates were managed by scribes and servants, and their lives were far removed from those of the common people. The military was central to Assyrian life. Every able-bodied man could be called upon to serve, especially during the empire's frequent campaigns. Soldiers were respected members of society, and military success brought honor and sometimes rewards from the state. The army was well organized and featured specialized units such as archers, charioteers, and siege engineers. Military innovations and strict discipline helped the Assyrians build one of the most formidable forces of the ancient world, which in turn helped them expand and control vast regions. Scribes held an essential role in the functioning of the empire. Trained in complex cuneiform writing, they managed records, composed royal decrees, and maintained archives. Their education was lengthy and demanding, and only a few were selected for this intellectual path. Their contributions to administration, trade, and diplomacy were invaluable, as they ensured smooth communication across the empire's provinces. Temples and palaces often served as centers of learning where scribes and scholars preserved literary texts, legal codes, and religious traditions. The daily lives of common citizens were centered around their trades and families. Farmers made up the largest segment of the population. They worked land owned by the state or by elites and paid taxes in the form of grain or labor. Their work was vital, as agriculture was the backbone of the Assyrian economy. Artisans, blacksmiths, potters, and weavers lived in cities and towns, producing goods for both local use and long-distance trade. These skilled workers often formed guilds and passed their knowledge from one generation to the next. Women in Assyrian society had varied roles depending on their social status. While elite women might manage household affairs and estates or even wield influence behind the scenes, most women were engaged in domestic tasks, weaving, and supporting their families. In some cases, Women served as priestesses or temple workers, participating in religious rituals and maintaining sacred sites. Though Assyrian society was patriarchal, women were respected for their contributions within the household and community. Religion was woven into every part of Assyrian life. Temples dedicated to gods like Ashur, Ishtar, and Nabu were central to both urban and rural life. People prayed for protection, harvests, and guidance. Rituals, offerings, and festivals were regular occurrences, often involving large gatherings and public ceremonies. Religious officials held high status, and the king was closely associated with divine favor, often commissioning grand temples and dedicating conquests to the gods. Assyrian cities, especially Nineveh and Ashur, were bustling centers of culture and administration. Markets thrived with goods from across the empire, from luxury items to everyday necessities. Streets were lined with houses, workshops, and temples, often built with mud bricks and adorned with intricate carvings and reliefs. Public art, including grand palace murals and statues, depicted scenes of victory, daily life, and religious devotion, reinforcing both the power of the king and the cultural pride of the people. Despite the rigid hierarchy, the people of the Assyrian Empire lived lives filled with tradition, purpose, and resilience. Their contributions in architecture, warfare, governance, and writing left a lasting legacy. Life in the empire, while often harsh and demanding, was also marked by community ties, spiritual dedication, and the unrelenting drive to maintain order and stability in a vast and dynamic civilization. Military prowess and siege warfare techniques. Military prowess and siege warfare techniques have played pivotal roles in the shaping of human history. From the earliest fortifications of Mesopotamia to the grand medieval castles of Europe, siege warfare evolved alongside advancements in military strategy, engineering, and technology. These techniques were born out of necessity, as walled cities and fortresses offered significant defense advantages, compelling aggressors to devise innovative methods to breach such defenses. Military commanders understood that brute force alone often could not guarantee victory. Thus, a blend of tactical intelligence, resource management, and psychological pressure became vital in siege scenarios. Historically, military prowess was often measured by a leader's ability to conduct successful sieges. This required not only physical strength and a disciplined army, but also strategic acumen. Leaders and generals who excelled in siege warfare displayed a profound understanding of timing, patience, and adaptability. An army laying siege had to contend with more than just walls. Disease, supply shortages, and enemy reinforcements were constant threats. Therefore, the ability to maintain morale, manage logistics, and anticipate the moves of the besieged became defining elements of military competence. In ancient times, siege warfare was relatively rudimentary but effective for its era. Attackers used battering rams, scaling ladders, and siege towers to reach and overcome walls. Fire was also a weapon of choice, as attackers tried to set fire to wooden gates or structures within the city. As defenses improved, so did the means of attack. The use of catapults, ballistae, and other projectile launching devices allowed armies to inflict damage from a distance, weakening defenses before direct assaults. Engineers became integral to military campaigns, designing and constructing siege engines, digging tunnels to collapse walls, or building ramps to elevate troops over defensive barriers. During the medieval period, the sophistication of siege tactics increased considerably. Castles with thick stone walls and moats demanded greater ingenuity. The trebuchet, a powerful counterweight-based catapult, emerged as a formidable siege engine, capable of hurling massive projectiles over great distances to destroy walls or demoralize defenders. Siege warfare also included psychological tactics, such as cutting off water supplies or launching diseased animals or corpses into the besieged area to spread fear and illness. Such actions were intended not only to weaken the defenders physically, but also to break their will to resist. Armies frequently employed mining techniques, digging beneath walls to weaken foundations and cause structural collapse. Defenders countered with countermines and sorties to disrupt these operations. These subterranean battles were often as intense and perilous as open combat. Moreover, siege camps themselves became semi-permanent establishments, with organized systems for food distribution, communication, and medical care, highlighting the logistical complexity of such campaigns. The longer a siege lasted, the more critical these support systems became, testing the endurance and organizational skills of commanders. Naval sieges added another dimension to the art of warfare. Coastal cities often required blockades by sea to cut off supplies and reinforcements. These operations called for cooperation between land and naval forces, as well as the construction of floating siege platforms and the use of fire ships to destroy enemy fleets. Control of the seas could decisively turn the tide in favor of the besieging force, especially when combined with relentless pressure on land. Siege warfare was not only a contest of arms, but also a test of intellect and innovation. It compelled the development of military architecture, leading to increasingly complex defensive structures, such as concentric castles and star forts. These fortifications, in turn, inspired new offensive strategies and tools, ensuring a constant evolution of techniques. Each innovation prompted a counter-innovation, creating a dynamic cycle of military advancement. Throughout history, military prowess in siege warfare was not defined merely by conquest, but by the capacity to adapt to new challenges, make effective use of available resources, and outthink the opponent. It was a slow, grinding form of warfare that often demanded months or even years of sustained effort. Yet, for all its brutality, siege warfare was a reflection of human ingenuity in the face of formidable obstacles, and it remains a testament to the enduring complexity of military history. The fall of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire, once the most formidable and feared power of the ancient Near East, experienced a dramatic and rapid downfall by the end of the 7th century BCE. Known for its vast military prowess, advanced administrative system, and ambitious building projects, the empire had long dominated Mesopotamia and extended its influence into Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant. However, despite its apparent strength, internal weaknesses and external pressures gradually eroded its foundations, culminating in its eventual collapse. The seeds of the empire's fall were sown during its period of expansion. The Assyrian kings, particularly rulers like Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and Ashurbanipal, had expanded the empire to unprecedented levels. While this brought immense wealth and tribute from conquered lands, it also overextended the empire's military and administrative capabilities. Governing a vast and diverse territory required immense resources and continuous military campaigns to suppress rebellions and enforce loyalty. This constant warfare strained the economy and fatigued the population, particularly in the core Assyrian cities. As Assyria expanded, it also accumulated many enemies. The harsh methods employed to subdue populations, such as forced deportations, punitive destruction, and heavy taxation, created widespread resentment. Though effective in the short term, these tactics bred deep-seated animosity among subject peoples. Over time, this resentment coalesced into organized resistance. The empire's rigid centralization and dependence on military strength made it vulnerable to coordinated attacks once its power began to wane. Another significant factor in Assyria's decline was succession instability and internal dissent. After the death of Ashurbanipal around 627 BCE, the empire faced a period of political turmoil. Rival claimants to the throne sparked internal strife, weakening the coherence of the state. Civil wars and power struggles drained resources and distracted the leadership from growing threats on the empire's borders. The once centralized authority began to fragment, and loyalty among provincial governors wavered. At the same time, powerful coalitions of enemies began to rise. The most decisive threat came from the Medes and the Babylonians. The Babylonians, under the leadership of Nabopolassar, allied with the Medes, led by Cyaxares. These two rising powers capitalized on Assyria's internal chaos and launched a series of coordinated military campaigns. They were soon joined by the Scythians and Cimmerians, who also saw an opportunity to challenge Assyrian supremacy. This formidable alliance brought immense pressure upon the Assyrian heartland. The turning point came with the fall of the Assyrian capital, Nineveh, in 612 BCE. This siege and subsequent destruction marked a symbolic and practical end to Assyrian dominance. The city, a jewel of architecture and culture, was reduced to ruins after fierce fighting. The loss of Nineveh was followed by a rapid series of defeats, with remaining Assyrian forces retreating and attempting to hold out in smaller strongholds like Haran. However, the momentum had shifted decisively. By 609 BCE, Haran too had fallen, effectively ending the Assyrian state. Despite the end of its political power, the Assyrian legacy endured. Its administrative systems, military strategies, and cultural achievements influenced successor empires, including the Babylonians and Persians. The Assyrians had developed a sophisticated bureaucracy, pioneered advanced engineering techniques, and preserved vast amounts of knowledge in their libraries. Their contributions to art, law, and governance were remembered and adapted by later civilizations. The fall of the Assyrian Empire stands as a stark reminder of how even the most powerful states can collapse under the weight of overextension, internal disunity, and external opposition. It was not a sudden or isolated event, but rather the culmination of years of mounting challenges and systemic weaknesses. Once the empire's core was compromised and its leadership fractured, it could no longer maintain control over its vast domains. The fall was swift but not unexpected, as the signs of decline had long been visible. In historical reflection, the Assyrian Empire's rise and fall provide valuable insight into the nature of imperial power. Dominance built on military force and fear, without sustainable political and social integration, proved ultimately fragile. The collapse of Assyria reshaped the political map of the ancient Near East and opened the path for new powers to emerge, forever altering the course of history in the region. Legacy of the Assyrian Empire in later civilizations. The legacy of the Assyrian Empire, one of the most formidable powers of the ancient Near East, left an indelible mark on subsequent civilizations. Emerging from the region of northern Mesopotamia, the Assyrians established a sophisticated empire that thrived between the 10th and 7th centuries BCE. Their influence extended well beyond their time, shaping the course of history through their innovations in governance, military strategy, architecture, and culture. Even after the fall of their empire in 612 BCE, the echoes of Assyrian achievements continued to reverberate through successive empires and societies across the region. One of the most enduring aspects of the Assyrian legacy was their development of centralized administration and imperial governance. The Assyrians built a complex bureaucratic system that allowed them to manage a vast and diverse empire efficiently. They appointed provincial governors, collected taxes, and maintained detailed records, setting a precedent for future empires like the Persians and later the Romans. This system of organization became a model for maintaining control over large territories, ensuring communication, and regulating trade and law throughout the empire. The Assyrians were also renowned for their military prowess, which was unmatched in the ancient world. Their well-trained and disciplined army utilized advanced weapons made of iron, siege engines, and tactical formations that gave them a strategic advantage in battle. The concept of psychological warfare was also practiced by the Assyrians, as they used displays of power and harsh reprisals to instill fear and discourage rebellion. These tactics influenced later military traditions and were studied and adopted by civilizations that followed, including the Babylonians, Persians, and even some aspects of Roman military doctrine. In architecture and urban planning, the Assyrians made significant contributions. Their capital cities, such as Nineveh and Nimrud, featured grand palaces, temples, and extensive library systems. The palaces were adorned with intricate reliefs that depicted scenes of conquest, daily life, and mythology, serving both as art and historical documentation. These works influenced artistic traditions in the region for centuries. The famous library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, one of the earliest systematically organized libraries, preserved thousands of cuneiform tablets, providing invaluable insights into ancient Mesopotamian knowledge, literature, and science. This preservation of texts helped transmit Mesopotamian culture and learning to later civilizations. Linguistically and culturally, the Assyrians played a crucial role in the transmission of ideas. They adopted and adapted the Akkadian language and cuneiform script, which became widely used throughout the empire for administrative and scholarly purposes. Their efforts in preserving myths, legal codes, and scientific observations laid a foundation for future scholarly traditions in the Near East. The blending of Assyrian culture with those of the conquered peoples created a rich tapestry that influenced the development of Aramaic as a lingua franca, which continued to be widely used even under Persian and Hellenistic rule. Religion in the Assyrian Empire, centered around the chief deity Ashur, was deeply integrated into governance and warfare. While their religious practices did not become dominant in later empires, the concept of divine kingship and the association of political authority with divine will persisted. This idea was echoed in the Achaemenid Persian ideology and continued through various empires that justified rule through divine favor. Temples built in Assyria became models for later religious structures, and the integration of religion with statecraft remained a recurring theme in the region's political life. Trade and economic integration under the Assyrians also laid groundwork for future networks. They established long-distance trade routes that connected regions as far as Egypt, Anatolia, and the Persian Gulf. These networks facilitated not only the exchange of goods but also the movement of ideas and cultural practices. Later empires benefited from these routes, which continued to serve as arteries of commerce and diplomacy in the ancient world. Rediscovery of Assyria. Archaeology and modern understanding. The rediscovery of Assyria stands as one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of archaeology, bringing to light a lost empire that once dominated the ancient Near East. For centuries, Assyria had been known only through fragmented references in classical texts and religious scriptures, with many doubting the scale and significance of its achievements. It wasn't until the 19th century that physical evidence emerged to confirm and vastly expand the modern understanding of this ancient civilization. Excavations in northern Mesopotamia, particularly in modern-day Iraq, uncovered the ruins of cities such as Nineveh, Nimrud, and Khorsabad, revealing the grandeur and complexity of Assyrian society. The process began in earnest with the efforts of European explorers and diplomats who had an interest in the biblical world and were driven by a desire to validate ancient texts. Among the most notable early pioneers was Austin Henry Layard, whose work in the mid-1800s unveiled the ruins of Nimrud and Nineveh. His discoveries stunned the world. Monumental palaces, colossal statues of winged bulls, and detailed wall reliefs offered a vivid window into a forgotten empire that once wielded immense power across a vast region. The Assyrians, previously imagined as a vague or shadowy people, were now understood to be formidable builders, administrators, and warriors with a legacy that shaped the history of the ancient Near East. One of the greatest revelations from these excavations was the extensive use of written records. The discovery of the royal libraries, especially that of King Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, revolutionized the understanding of ancient Mesopotamian literature and governance. Thousands of clay tablets inscribed in cuneiform script were uncovered, offering insights into mythology, legal systems, astronomy, medicine, and historical annals. These tablets preserved not only Assyrian thought but also older Sumerian and Babylonian texts, acting as a bridge between civilizations and shedding light on millennia of cultural development in Mesopotamia. What surprised many scholars was the level of sophistication in Assyrian art and urban planning. Reliefs carved into palace walls depicted scenes of military campaigns, hunting expeditions, religious rituals, and daily life with intricate detail. These artworks were not only decorative but served as political tools, reinforcing the king's power and divine favor. The layout of cities like Nineveh demonstrated advanced urban design, including wide boulevards, canals, and fortified walls, reflecting a high degree of state organization and engineering knowledge. As these findings were transported to museums across Europe, particularly the British Museum, public interest in the ancient Near East surged. The artifacts became subjects of fascination, inspiring artists, writers, and scholars. Assyria, once reduced to a biblical footnote, now took its place as a cornerstone of early civilization. The rediscovery also played a crucial role in the broader field of Assyriology, leading to the decipherment of cuneiform and a deeper understanding of the broader Mesopotamian world. Despite the grandeur, the archaeological record also revealed the harsh realities of Assyrian rule. Military prowess and conquest were central to the empire's expansion, and the reliefs often depicted brutal campaigns and subjugation of enemies. These elements provided a fuller, more nuanced picture of the Assyrians not merely as builders of great cities, but as a complex society shaped by ambition, spirituality, and conflict. Modern archaeological methods have continued to refine the picture painted by early explorers. New technologies such as satellite imagery, digital mapping, and ground-penetrating radar have allowed researchers to explore sites without intrusive digging. Moreover, recent efforts by Iraqi and international teams have aimed to preserve and restore sites damaged by conflict or looting, reinforcing the importance of cultural heritage in understanding human history. Today, the rediscovery of Assyria is not just a story of ruins and relics, but a testament to the resilience of historical inquiry. It underscores the enduring value of uncovering the past to inform the present. The legacy of Assyria, once lost beneath centuries of sand and myth, now lives again through the voices of its kings, the artistry of its people, and the dedication of those who continue to bring its story to light.